Good evening. This is the July 27th, 2022 meeting of the Village of Mamaroneck Planning Board. Before we get into the agenda, we will take attendance for our minute keeper. We have all members of the planning board here: Cindy Goldstein, Ellen Styler, I'm sorry, Richard Littman, and myself. We have our consultants, John Keller, consulting engineer, Teresa Bachner, our land use attorney, and Alicia Moore, our consulting planner from AKRF, and Susan Oakley from Terabella Landscaping, our landscape architect consultant. And of course, Brittany O'Neill, our land use secretary. We are absent anyone from the building department, the building inspectors tonight, as we have vacations and other things happening. Okay, first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the meeting held on the 13th of July. Does anybody have any comments on these or corrections or anything on these minutes? I didn't see anything myself, but that doesn't mean it's not there.
I'd like to add a sentence on page 4 where it talks about my recusal from that application.
Yeah.
If we could add a sentence that said, right after that sentence that said Ms. Goldstein, add the sentence that says Ms. Goldstein turned off her screen and did not participate in the discussion.
Yeah, I read that and I thought maybe we should put something there too. So thank you. I forgot about it.
I'll catch those every time.
I had a suggestion as well. Cindy, did you have anything else?
No, I did not.
My suggestion is on page, it's related to 900 Rushmore. So I need to find it. But I wanted to get in that we had requested the combined square footage of disturbance between the two projects. I think there's a natural place to put it. I'm just trying to refine it. I hadn't marked it.
Oh, I thought I read that.
It does refer to it, the fact that there's two, but I didn't think it was specific.
Yeah, you questioned it, right. It's on the top of page 5 where you noted the work on the other parcel. Okay. So it should be in that paragraph, right?
Yeah, I just that we had requested that. Yes, that's right. Yep.
Okay. We requested total square footage for the area of disturbance.
Yeah. And I think my suggestion would be that it would just go at the end of the Miss Gallagher sentence there. So Miss Gallagher noted that she believed the land disturbance for the other project is minimal, and then maybe second sentence, planning board requested combined disturbance of the two projects.
Okay, good.
And actually one more thing, just reading a little bit further, talks about I was excused, I wasn't, I was recused.
Oh, right. You're recused. That's a big difference, right? Good catch. Anybody else? Read like the stuff that's kind of boilerplate. Go outside my window. All right. Nothing else then. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
I have a second.
Second.
Okay, Ellen,
Yes.
Seamus,
Yes.
Richard,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
I vote yes. Okay. Okay, next on the agenda is a new application before the planning board for 535 East Boston Post Road. This is an old bank building, former bank building. And we have an applicant who is requesting approval to change the use and do some interior renovations for a rehab and physical therapy center. So Brittany, if you'd like to promote, if someone's here to speak on behalf of the applicant. You can promote them. Those of you who are wondering, this is a building that's up by the Romani Diner and the Dunkin' Donuts. Okay. Brittany, do we have everyone that we need?
That's it, right, Louis? Just you?
Yes, it's just me this evening. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Louis, I guess we'll call you Louis. Would you present the application to the board and to the public who may be watching?
Okay. Yes, good evening, board. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. As you stated, it's what was formerly the Chase building on East 535 East Boston Post Road. The new owner of the property would like to change it into a physical therapy and rehabilitation center. No changes to the exterior are proposed except for removal of the existing drive-up window that was in the rear of the property. The site meets the code as far as parking spaces, and again, there's no change to the exterior except for the addition, or sorry, the replacement of the existing windows to something a little bit more energy efficient.
And there's no change to the site either, as far as parking, putting in any kind of stormwater management, everything's in place. You're leaving everything as is, correct?
That is correct. We don't plan on changing anything on site. Again, all applications will be interior fit up for rooms for rehabilitation, acupuncture, and sports therapy, and massages and things like that.
Okay. This is pretty straightforward, I think. Anyway, it seems pretty straightforward. Alicia from AKRF, do you all have anything that you want to tell the board about this? I know you sent us a memo dated the 20th of July.
Right, so no, as you're saying, pretty straightforward. We're recommending type 2 under C9, so no environmental review. And we did send a notice to the Westchester County Planning Department and received the receipt for that. So that's all there is for that.
Okay. And John got off easy on this one. There was no engineering review, no engineering review.
Yep.
Unless you want to just say hello.
Good evening, everyone.
Okay. And Susan Oakley from Terabella, you did send us a mail. You did have one recommendation. Go for it.
Hi, good night, good evening, everyone. If you view the photos that I took on a site visit, you can see that the area is much in need of some canopied trees. So my suggestion is to place 2 trees on the site, in the front of the site, 1 on each side of the front door, between the 2 windows on each side. That would be my suggestion. If the applicant needs recommendations for size appropriate tree recommendations, that I'd be happy to provide those.
Yeah, that'd be great. I discussed that with my client earlier today. She was thinking about maybe possibly some Japanese, a couple of Japanese maples front. She actually would prefer to just leave the front as is to see the exterior brick veneer without obstruction. But if it's this board's recommendation and the approval is reliant on that, then she has no issue with providing those 2 trees as
Okay. The village does have a policy to increase the canopy, the tree canopy, wherever we can, add street trees wherever we can. So that's pretty much something we do at almost every application we try to do. And Susan has a list of native trees. I'm not sure Japanese maples fall into that category. I know they've been used a lot ornamentally. I have one in my backyard because it was there when I bought the house. But other trees that are similar, that would work probably just fine. And I think meet your client's requirements. As the tree grows taller, it wouldn't block the brick and the facade. It might when the tree is small. Bless you.
God bless you.
Okay.
Yeah, if we get a list of that of the recommended options, that would be wonderful. And so I can go over to her and then she can decide which one she'd like to put in front, install in the front of the door.
So, Susan,
That'd be great.
can you get them to Brittany, or Brittany might have them? And we'll get them to you. Okay. From Brittany.
I can forward those to Brittany tomorrow.
Okay, great. Okay, so I understand that tonight we're going to type it for secret, and you'll come back in September for final approval. There was a little issue with your notification to the neighbors for this particular project. But once we type it for secret, you are free to go to the BAR if you can get it on their agenda in August. And that will save you some time. They might not be able to give you a final approval until after we do the approval, but they can certainly ask you any questions and settle any issues while you're waiting to come back to planning board.
Okay. What was the issue with the mailers, with one of the neighbors?
Mailing was sent to the property addresses rather than where it's stated to change it to the property owners. So you will have to mail it again for the September meeting.
Okay. Based on the rules and the directions that were on the requirements of the mailers, if you were to follow that, that procedure, we followed it with the property owners, and some of them only had no number, just a street name, East Boston Post Road, or just the road that's behind it. I believe it's Lawn Terrace.
I'll forward you the list that I put together. It had some White Plains and Scarsville addresses. Since those are commercial buildings, they're owned by, not the people that are occupying the space. So I did have those when I did the property addresses. It was a different address than what it was sent to.
Okay. All right. Sure. I mean, and that was done through the same website and on directions that were left for us to do them on the notification that was sent to us as far as the procedure.
Yes.
Okay.
I think there's two address lists you can get when you go to that website. One is property.
One is
And
one is
the other
applicant,
one
and
is-
one is property owner.
Right, and one is occupant. You have to make sure you use the property owners and not the occupants. Okay,
If that didn't happen, then that's my mistake, but I thought I had addressed that, but I'll certainly look at it.
okay, but in the meantime, we can type this for secret, and you can move on to BAR. You really won't be losing, much time, maybe 2 weeks.
Okay.
Get back to us in the beginning of September. Go to them, and you should be fine. Okay.
So I'm looking at the application summary sheet, and it does not show this application going to BAR. Is that a typo?
No, I
We
don't
don't
believe
do-
BAR was required for this. There was no outside work, exterior work over 10,000 from my understanding.
Oh, don't they have to go in for a sign?
That would be a separate application that hasn't gone yet. So it's a separate.
Oh, so you don't have to go to BAR. Okay, my mistake. Good catch, Ms. Goldstein. I didn't realize the sign. I guess maybe I knew this at some point in time, but I didn't remember that the sign is a separate application. Okay, all right. So let's type it, and we'll see you in September.
All right. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay. Okay, I need a motion to type this for secret as a type 2 action.
So moved.
I need a second.
Second.
Okay. The vote, Seamus,
Yes.
Ellen,
Yes.
Richard,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay. All right. Thank you. We'll see you in September.
All right. Thank you very much for your time.
It'll be quick.
Yeah, have a wonderful evening.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. That was unfortunate. Okay, next up, we have 1037 Oriente Avenue, which was changing even today as we got ready. Okay, as we're waiting to get everybody who needs to on, I want to thank the members of the planning board. I want to thank our consultants. I want to thank everyone here on the screen for scrambling to make sure that this application was complete enough that we didn't necessarily have to hold them over to September. And I hope the applicant appreciates everybody scrambled. We were getting things as late as this afternoon. So when we last left you, we had a couple of issues that we raised. So Ms. Eaton, do you want to sort of bring us up to date with where we are now?
Absolutely. And yes, we greatly appreciate the board's time and efforts here, very much so.
Well, not just the board, but Susan scrambled, John scrambled, Teresa scrambled, Alicia, calling her by all the pronunciations of her name tonight, scrambled. So
Yes.
yeah, they did a lot of work to get everything so that we had everything tonight.
That's absolutely true. Thank you. Sorry for the omission, but absolutely, we're very grateful. So just to start on my end, we have addressed, I believe we've addressed all the comments for AKRF, which largely consisted of clarifying the travel way on the north side and also clarifying the EAF and submitting a signed one. So I believe we are good with all those comments. The next one up is for Hudson Engineering and Kellard Sessions. And I think if it's okay, I'll just share my screen with our revised drawings, and I'm going to let Michael kind of share with us what he's done.
Yeah, now this is what we got, the latest drawings on here we just received this afternoon. So some of the members of the board may not have seen them because they came kind of late. And then, of course, it was too late to get a memo from John. So John, you're going to have to verbally.
Yeah, there were 4 outstanding comments from the last memo. Michael Stein, Hudson Engineering, and please apologize. I apologize. I just have a respiratory infection right now, so I'm kind of losing my voice. So just in short, item 5, the water service was to be relocated, so it wasn't underneath the stormwater practice. That was done. That was on sheet 3. On sheet 2, the size and location of the stockpiles were adjusted based upon the amount of material coming out. There's 2 different ones. There's the one you just circled and there's one just below that. The sump detail has been added. I'm not sure if you have the right. Was added to, I believe, sheet C3. And tree protect.
Memo says C2, I think.
Yeah, and I just was looking at C2, so yeah, but it's on C3, and the tree protection was relocated or extended to the drip line of the existing trees on sheet 2.
Yeah, I think we just saw that on feature. Yeah.
So right up along the front of the property.
Okay.
You can zoom in.
On this one here. Oh, hold on one second. Everybody see that?
Yes. One of the questions was the the trees that were on the property line that are not necessarily on the property, I see on the upper right-hand corner, we have a drip line, but I'm not sure what it covers. And then, there's smaller trees on the other property, but I think that had been mentioned too, that the trees that are literally right on the property line needed protection as well.
Which property line?
Susan, you might want to chime in here, since you're the one who pointed this out to us.
As I mentioned in an email, I have not formally reviewed the most recent submission. I did put eyes on it after work today, and there are things that need to be corrected. So,
Okay.
yeah, the neighboring trees have not been identified, so it's difficult to see where that tree protection needs to be. In addition, there are trees that do not have the drip line or tree protection on them on either Hudson's C2 plan or the landscape plan or the tree preservation plan.
Okay. Okay. So,
Dan, is there any chance that, I'm
Bring
sorry.
my drawing up that Angie worked on just to compare,
Right.
so we can all see, because we intended to do that. My assistant worked on this with me. I worked on the plant list, but she was coordinating the drip lines and things.
Are you
So,
looking for specifics?
Dan, which sheet of
Yeah.
yours would it?
I guess
would
it
you
would be
want?
my landscape, well,
Oh,
no,
this one
this
right
one,
here,
this tree removal
tree
plan.
preservation.
So, yeah, the tree, so we have the same, similar as Mike's, we showed the drip line as best we can. There's going to be construction. And then this is a large drip line, but still there's going to be construction around it. So we protected what we could. And then all along this side over here, we're just blocking all that off. This you said this was the north side, Diane?
The north side is at the top of the
Yeah,
page.
the existing gravel driveway is there, so that's already impacted, so we're leaving that. And mainly it was this whole back corner to lop that off and to protect that whole section.
okay.
At the bottom of this plan that's on the screen now, there's a 22-inch tree right there where your cursor is. I don't believe that, and next to it, a
12.
12, correct. Chances are that the drip line of those trees extend far beyond that construction fence. In addition, there's to the left an 11-inch, I believe, right at where the jog, keep going to the left with your cursor right there. There's that one. And then at the top, directly above it, there's a 24-inch tree that will be retained that hasn't been designated with tree protection. So these, yes, the two plans mirror, your plan and the Hudson plan mirror each other, but neither one has correct protection for those trees.
Well, this tree at the bottom, we were proposing to remove because it's in really bad condition. It's leaning and it's practically bare. So
That's not, that's
Yeah, that
not,
wasn't the one. Mhm.
it's the one to the right, two trees to the right, the 22-inch diameter.
Dan, do you have notes that state, that the? I
No,
mean,
this
would-
one was a
would-
cherry tree, and then it wasn't really a very good tree. But the one along the property line, we were adding new ones in that area because it was really a bad, broken, leaning tree.
Which tree are you talking about?
This one down here that we're removing.
That's
I don't
not,
think that's in question.
So it's this one. This is like a little small ornamental one. I'm not sure where you're seeing the 22-inch tree. That's within.
It's this one right here, Dan. See my cursor moving?
No.
So I think the point
Over
is
here,
that
you
that
mean?
fence is not far enough for the drip
Oh.
line
Mm,
diagrammatically.
I see where
Think.
you're pointing in.
For both those trees, I think Susan mentioned. Okay, so let me,
There's room to do that, yes.
yeah, I mean, so we have issues with trees on your property that don't have tree protection indicated. We have issues with trees on the property line to the south and south that haven't been identified, and therefore they're not protected. And we had issues when we last left 2 weeks ago. We had issues with number of native versus non-native plants. Susan, did I summarize the open issues?
Yes, yes. And, you know, I apologize. This came in yesterday and
Yeah.
I've
Right.
not had the ability to address it completely. So
Right.
So I have gone through the whole shrub list, and there's serviceberry, chokeberry, clethra, inkberry, sheep laurel, mountain laurel, spice bush. I changed the whole landscape to be native, for the better or worse, but it's all native. And then I changed the trees are sugar maple, river birch, American dogwood, Colorado spruce, white pine, cherry. You know, so I think I really made a big
Yeah,
push.
your memo states that you changed 7 Norway spruce to Colorado spruce.
Yeah, that was the second round. First round, I did all the other ones.
Right.
And then the comment was that we could do better. So I took away the Norway spruce to a Colorado, of which there were 7. So that was the last, like, final little change just last week. But it's a very native list.
And the
appreciated.
Susan dated the 21st, so that was based on your submission for tonight's meeting. And then you responded to that memo with your memo dated the 25th, which we received yesterday, the 26th, telling us about the Norway spruce. So the plans you
Otherwise, all the
submitted
other
yesterday
changes
and the
are made.
memo you submitted yesterday, Susan did not have opportunity to review for us. And we, as we stated when we started this, we tried very hard to get everything in for 7 p.m. tonight. And we accept things much later than we normally accept things, but this is what happens when we are scrambling at the last minute.
Can I ask a question that if possibly and I thought Michael Hudson had notes to this effect, but that we would very carefully place all this outside of the drip line, which is a real visual on site. You know, like this is I mean, these plans sometimes are a bit diagrammatic, you know, in terms of their actual footprint. Would notes suffice, or do you want to have this graphically more representative of what you think? Just to try and clarify. What would be best?
My concern is that when any job gets started, that it's handed off to the contractors. And so they take one plan and they follow that plan.
Mhm.
And, you know, we can all hope and assume that they are following the plan. But if it is not on the plan, then there's no follow-up or repercussions to whether it was done properly. And that always is my suggestion, to have the tree preservation plan mirror the plan usually, which will be Hudson's plan, that is utilized in the field. So that's the reason to have them match.
Mhm.
And to have the marching orders moving forward be proper and across the board.
Yeah, and it would be impossible for a building inspector to enforce the tree protection if it's not on the plan. I think that's what everybody looks at.
I definitely, I acknowledge that one that's definitely missing, like that 24-inch tree. I was talking more about like the distance from the tree stumps shown on the plan. Like, we're saying that that's not far enough, you know, and I just think sometimes these plans are a little schematic, you know, so to speak, and not necessarily, they don't have dimensions on it. So I'm just trying to clarify if like a good broad, you know, big note saying that it has to go at the drip line would be sufficient to handle that. No, okay.
Not in my mind, but you know, there are other members of the planning board.
Sure.
Well, given the fact that we just today were informed of a project that was approved 2 years ago where they've got the heavy equipment parked under the trees. And they're planning to cut down some trees that were supposed to be kept in the site plan. I think the more we have on paper, the better it is. And even when it's on paper, we need eyes on the project as it's going on. We tried our best. I think we realized that the problem was going to be with the tree preservation plan, because when you first came to us 2 weeks ago, you didn't have that piece, even though I do believe you should have known about it, because you, some of you were involved with a project just across the street that required a tree preservation plan. So that shouldn't have been a surprise. And our schedule is posted every December for the year. So the fact that we don't meet in August shouldn't have been a surprise either. But it sounds like we're going to have to adjourn until September to get the project finalized. Do I have any planning board members who disagree with this?
It would be easy to work with staff to amend that tree line, if that's the only issue.
We don't meet again until the second Wednesday of September.
As a commit, as a whole board, but can I just work with staff if I only have to modify the tree drip line in a couple?
The board has to pass the resolution approving the site plan. Now, as we tried,
Could that be a condition of approval of final coordination with Ms. Oakley?
I
mean, overall, with the
I can only speak for myself. I prefer to have everything wrapped up and on paper that we see, especially since we've been having issues with applicants with regards to this matter. How do the other members of the board feel, and and then Teresa, if we need you to weigh in, you can weigh in too, but let's just see how the board feels. Anybody they want to put this in the resolution as conditions at this point in time, with the building department then making sure it gets done?
So just to, yeah, I mean, I think there might have been one or two more issues we would want to talk about too, but
Right.
would this be a condition, because this seems discreet, would this be a condition that drip lines were added to certain sheets and then, this is part where I don't know how this would work, and then like to the satisfaction of Miss Oakley? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, it's drip lines, making sure that the trees in the perimeter are identified and have proper drip lines, and also that the proposed plantings are adequate with regards to the mix of native versus non-natives. So those are the three that we were left open with after we received the plan last week.
I'd like to just follow through. It's not just identifying the drip line, it's that the drip line determines where the tree protection will go in the field.
Right.
And that's the bottom line, is so that you don't have trucks parked under, on top of plantings.
Right.
So then, and just following it through. So I think that last point on the natives, we could debate right now, right? I mean, we have a list. And it's, adequate or not, I suppose. But back to the drip line. So it's a two-step process, right? Identify them, and help me here if I'm off on how these plans are used, and then move construction activities around them. Does that summarize it fairly?
I'd say so, yes.
So, and then the question that I would have would be, wouldn't there be a second part to that where someone from Kellard Sessions would need to review the new construction, the movement of construction activities to make sure that that was still adequate, or how do we feel about that?
Yes, our office would look at Michael Stein's plan after Susan has agreed on what trees need to be protected.
Yeah.
We would
Good
make
point.
sure that no work would be in that area. At the moment, I believe it may just be the stockpile, maybe the northern stockpile that might be in the drip line.
Yeah.
But, yeah. I have no issue in our office handling it as a condition if the board wanted to.
And I'm for now, I'm just trying to clearly define it, because it wasn't as simple as even first proposed, right? I mean, there's two of our consultants with different expertises that do need to review. I still I think that if it is discrete, if the trees are on here, and if we all agree that they're on here, and we just need to add that protection and then move construction activities, that could possibly be done during, as a condition in my mind. Because if it's all here, if there's nothing that, we think is not here or incorrect here, so I'd be willing to explore that further.
Anyone else from the board have any comments? No? Teresa, would you like to weigh in here, please? Since
I guess what worries me is we don't have any indication on the plans that I'm looking at of where the trees are on the adjoining properties, so we can make sure that the protection is sufficient. So I'm trying to figure out, I can certainly craft a condition that says, prior to the issuance of the building permit, as set forth in the Colored Sessions memorandum, the applicant shall modify the plans to address the relocation of the water surface from under the infiltration units. I think all of those things that I had listed in there, John, we don't need anymore, with the exception of the changes to the plans to show the tree protection appropriately.
Correct,
Is that right?
correct.
So,
Yeah, A, B, and C were addressed. D is still open.
okay. The problem I have is I don't have something from Susan and John that I can cite to say, if these things are satisfied, then we're okay, because we're like a step away from it. Because until John sees the trees and the tree protection on them, we can't really say for sure what else may need to be changed. So in the past, the planning board has always wanted to know precisely what the condition is, as opposed to having it conditioned on the approval of consultants subsequently.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I was trying to see if we could define it without subjectivity, just objectively draw circles and move things, and we could all look at it together. But if it starts this domino fall, that's going to take an opinion about whether it's okay, and then I think I'm less comfortable. I wanted to explore this.
I think this full categories, we tried hard, but we'll have to come back in September. In the meantime, I do believe you need to go to BAR.
I was gonna ask, would that be possible?
Brittany have to work with her her peer who handles BAR to see if you can get on the agenda for August. Again, they can't give you final approval until we get final approval, but they could do all the preliminary work and any questions they may have or anything like that. Actually, for a while, we always did coordinated reviews, sort of simultaneous, so we reach the end at the same time. So you can certainly try to work that out. And Brittany, how would they?
I mean, Barbara did tell me that they don't really do something called the preliminary. That was her advice. And as long as nothing is going to change with the architectural or massively with the site itself, I think you'd be okay. But I would suggest just calling Barbara tomorrow. I could tell her, what happened, what the changes will be, or what they're presumed to be, and go from there.
Right,
I can't guarantee anything, and I don't sit on BAR whatsoever, so I don't know how they operate, to be honest with you.
Before Barbara did BAR, the staff person who did before that, the applicants went to BAR while they were still at planning board.
Yeah, I don't know when that kind of changed.
Yeah, but there's new procedures in place because there's different people doing it now. But you can try.
I could try. Okay, as long as I have your permission, and I'll work that out.
Like I said, by code they can't give you final approval. But if they have questions and things you have to work on with the architecture, we're not. Nothing we've said here is regards the architecture or anything. So, okay. All right. Okay. Here's another one. We'll see you in September.
Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. Let's move on then to the next application. Myself organized here. Okay, the next item on the agenda is 572 Van Ranst. This is something we've been working on for a while. And let's see where we are. The only thing on the agenda tonight for Van Ranst is the secret termination. And then, of course, as we've said many times, once the secret determination is made, then the application can move forward to the next step, which is zoning board for zoning variances. And then I think they also have to go, no, they don't have, yes, they have to go to HCCMC and come back to planning board when all of that is done. Members of the planning board, you have before you material that was submitted by the applicant for the 3 outstanding questions that we had from last time, which was with regards to flood storage, the shut off of the utilities, which couldn't be at the street in case of flooding, an emergency management plan for evacuation or for the residents of the building, evacuation, non-evacuation, staying in place. We have Kristen Motel with us. Kristen, is there anything that you would like to say as we start?
Good evening, Chair, members of the Planning Board. For the record, Kristen Motel. I'm a partner at the law firm Cuddy and Fader on behalf of the applicant. The applicants are here tonight, as well as our full team. So we're here to answer any questions on the materials that were submitted at the end of the last meeting that you did summarize. I believe Keller Sessions had a chance to review the flood volume storage analysis that was amended based on Seamus's comments and reviewed, as well as their emergency management plan for flooding events and the utility shutoffs. We do have representatives from the applicants here tonight, property owners, as well as the architect's office, who can speak to questions related to that. So I don't know if at this time that might be appropriate to take any outstanding questions or comments on the materials submitted. Or I'd be happy to summarize the project if you think that would be helpful, but I think we're all pretty familiar.
Yeah, I think we just had those loose items. So why don't we, Alicia from AKRF, you guys sent us a memo, just kind of summarizing where we are. I don't think there's really, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add with regards to the details of the project. I personally have to say I was impressed with the amount of information you gathered on an emergency management plan in 2 days or a day and a half.
Well, I will say the applicants have a lot of that information already, right? Like they are keenly aware of the location of this property, and it's something that's been discussed since the board referenced it months ago. So it wasn't really a complete scramble, but thank you for that.
I think we asked you for it on the 13th and we got it dated the 15th. Or something like that. Okay. All right. And Alicia, you probably don't have much other than talking to us about SECRA. So if you want to hold your remarks till we get there. Okay. John, flood storage. You know, there's been some questions about flood storage. You know, it sounds simple enough. And, you know, we did see all those numbers on the page. But maybe for people who don't actually understand it, how you can have increased flood storage when there's 12 feet of water outside. Maybe in a nutshell, for the layperson, without going into a lot of engineering jargon, you can kind of explain to us how can a building like this increase its flood storage in a flood situation? Theoretically, you don't have to get into the numbers.
Yeah, you really look at the grades on the property as they exist today versus the grading in the future. And you examine the the available storage volume in increments of a foot. And you try to provide compensatory storage to replace any disturbance in the floodplain where you're losing volume. You try to obtain it in other locations on the site. I think the big question, and Seamus, I think, brought it up last week, was how do you handle the existing structure on the property that we know floods, but the applicant has a right to flood-proof that building. So what Michael's office did is he did not include the basement because he felt the basement was not drained, and he did not use the basement volume in his calculations of the existing condition, but he did use the volume of the first floor, which we know had flooded in Ida for an existing condition situation. I thought it was a conservative approach because the applicant does have the ability to flood-proof the building and stop the flooding of that building. So the real question is, should you consider the volume of a flooded building as floodplain? And it's my opinion you shouldn't, because you're entitled to stop the flooding of that building by flood-proofing the building. And in doing so, you're not required to provide compensatory storage. So when Michael looked at it, I believed he showed more volume of flood storage on the property today than really is, because they took the building into consideration.
Okay.
And even with including the existing building in his analysis, the regrading of the property in his proposed condition provided a greater volume of storage than presently exists on the site. And he also examined it in 1 foot increments, so that if we didn't have a 100-year storm, but we had a 10-year storm or a 25-year storm, we also had more storage in those smaller storms on the site and presently would be on the site in those same storms. So what I'm trying to say is I agree with Michael's calculation.
I think that just the idea, the concept of flood storage in a large flood is hard for people who aren't familiar with doing calculations to grasp. You know, like you're storing water somewhere so it's not going out into the flood and contributing to other properties. Am I like oversimplifying this?
And you know, the FEMA regulations state that you could put fill in the floodplain. They just require you not to increase the elevation of the floodplain by more than 1 foot. That's how the FEMA regulations are worded. Mamaroneck goes many steps beyond that.
Right.
And says we want no increase in fill. You can't increase the water elevation a fraction of an inch.
Right.
So it goes well beyond the federal requirements.
Right.
And I believe the applicant has met those requirements that the building
Okay.
requires.
Go ahead, Cindy.
No, well, I was going to sort of talk about the area as a whole, not just this building where, you know, I do think the applicant has done a wonderful job that will go as far as can be done to protect the residents of that building and others, based on John's discussion of how the water works down there. But I think at some point this village is going to have to really come to grips with that whole area. It's not flooding less, it's flooding more frequently and more severe. And we've been talking about this for years, back when, now I know this particular plot is not in the transit-oriented development overlay, but it's right in that same area. And in 2015, when I was on HCZMC, we wrote a very stern memo to the Board of Trustees at the time saying, the LWRP doesn't allow this. You cannot keep putting people in harm's way. And of course, no action has been taken and the floods are getting worse, and there's no reason to think it's going to stop. So while I think this applicant has done a terrific job, it's way past time for this village to really deal with flooding in an area that has always flooded and is only going to flood more frequently and more severely.
I think that, I don't think there's anyone here that wants to put more people in harm's way. I think that goes without saying. We are constrained though by the laws and the code, the village code and the state laws. So we have to follow those. I want to just echo what Cindy just said with regards to when the transit overlay district was put in to encourage residential units close to the train station, which like boggles my mind. But people like Cindy and the people on HCZM and other people at the time begged the Board of Trustees to do an environmental review for the whole district so that we wouldn't be forced as a planning board to deal with every project as an individual project. There would be some sort of cumulative effect. When is enough enough? When is too much too much? We are hamstrung now because that wasn't done and we don't have that tool in our toolbox. So I think that the work that we've all done here, including the applicant, has made this building better than the ones that went before it. Part of my comments has been informed by people who were living in the neighborhood and had problems during Ida and grabbed me when they saw me to tell me about how they had to evacuate from the second floor by jumping into a soft-sided raft. Wasn't fun. So, the boat was below, they were here, the boat was here. How do you get from here to there? And they had to climb over a wall to get there. This is difficult. We are a community that floods, and it will continue to flood and it will get worse. I think that we all are in agreement with that. The Army Corps of Engineers project, I think, I don't know the details, but I think the estimate is it's going to have like a 40% impact. 40%, okay? That's not even half. So we struggle, we're struggling with this, obviously. But again, we have to do what the law allows us to do. So does anybody else, I think, as far as the gas and the utility shut off, that was brought up at the last meeting by the building department people. They're moved up, so they're not at the street, which makes perfect sense. It should be the norm for any building that goes in, for anything goes in from now on in that flood area. But does anybody have anything? We can turn the mic over. I see Ashley Lai from AKRF has just joined us. Alicia's still.
I just have one comment about the emergency plan. I personally would feel more comfortable if there were some way of knowing that people knew the risk that they were taking by moving into this building. I don't know if we can require that, but I just feel like, people can move into this building and not realize what may happen. And, I don't know if we could have that in the emergency plan, that they are informed of the flood zone before they move in.
I think the emergency plan called for everyone to get a copy of it.
After they move in, right?
So Chair, I think I can speak to this. The plan calls for that to be provided with a draft copy of the lease. And we can certainly make that clear as a condition of approval. But the idea was, at the time a draft lease is presented to somebody who's interested in renting these units, which will be market rate, that would be presented as well. So the conversation would be had. And I did also just want to add on to what Ms. Goldstein was also referencing, because right now there are multifamily units there. There are 2 4-bedroom units. So there's, aside from an improvement over other development, recent development in this area of the village, there's also an extreme improvement on site conditions as opposed to what could be and what could still be permitted. And I think it's been demonstrated how seriously these applicants and the property owner are taking this redevelopment, how serious they take flooding, how they want to make things better. And of course, you know, they want their residents to be safe. They want their residents to be happy. And we'd be happy as a condition of approval to further clarify for you that would be presented at the time a draft lease was presented. So before anybody officially commits to moving into the building.
And even people who knew, and there's signs up in the garage, you know, move your car in case of flooding and whatnot. They didn't do it during Ida. People just, lots and lots of people didn't do it. So, you know, you need, I don't know, flashing red lights, you know, move your car. I don't know. I don't know how you get people to pay attention. But anyway, okay.
I just had one quick question. I just wanted to close out a little further than we did on this flood elevation quickly, just to make sure that I understand it. So so we show 4 elevations, right? Am I right that above that, if the water's above that, it doesn't matter what's there, it's all the same? Is that right?
Yes, there was no change in the volumes above the highest elevation of the site under either existing or proposed condition.
And then below, I mean, 19 is the same, and then below, I assume, same situation, right?
Yeah, below, if it typically doesn't drain, then you don't include it. As like a pond, you wouldn't include that volume because it doesn't drain. Michael didn't include the basement because it doesn't drain. I don't totally agree with that. I think you'd have a sump pump, and you're not going to live with water in your basement before a storm. So you'd have a sump pump and the volume would be there. I just disagree in the other, for other reasons, because the applicant could flood-proof that basement and keep the water out. They're perfectly entitled to it, and even the first floor.
Yeah.
So
I hear that. Yeah.
In any local regulation that I've found that deals with existing structures does not require compensatory storage for an existing structure that floods, because unless it's in the floodway. You can improve it if it's in the flood fringe. In the floodway, I don't believe the regulations require you to flood-proof it. They want it to flood in the floodway.
And that's fair enough. And I think the conservative approach is appreciated. But with that, so I'm going to make a statement that, correct me if I'm wrong. You know, it's a little better. I don't dispute that. But at 22, it looks similar to me, within 2%. Below 19, I guess it's the same. My opinion on this flood storage, and correct me if I'm way off base, is that this is a slot improvement for flooding at certain levels. Above those levels, this is no better. Below those levels, this is no better. It's really just that 20 and 21 foot elevation. But I may be misunderstanding what this is trying to say.
It's basic. I mean, we're have a slight increase, but that increase is really imperceptible overall. You couldn't even, it's not even measurable, the amount in the floodway.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
You can't measure it.
And really the point I'm making is this is helpful. I don't think this is super compelling. I don't think this is that the flood storage is massively different. Maybe at some slot levels it's helpful. That, you know, that is, you know, is what it is. But, you know, correct me if anyone thinks it's wrong, but I don't think this is any real revelation here based on the updated numbers. It was definitely different looking prior, but I don't think those were exactly correct.
Yeah, Chair Silver, this is Steve Glenner. I'm with
sorry,
the.
Steve, I'm sorry. Please yourself. This is not a public hearing. I don't know why you're on the panel, but this is, we're not having a public hearing. So I'm going to ask you, please. This is a discussion among the planning board members. Thank you. Okay, where are we here?
Okay, if I can, Kathy, where we left off last time, we had gone through the EAF part 2, and
Right.
everybody on the board was comfortable with the responses that were made. And then at the end of it, of course, Mr. O'Rourke had a question about the base flood elevation calculations. There was the question about a strong desire to have the emergency/evacuation plan, which we now have. And there was a question regarding the shutoff point. So all of that information has been provided. And so the next question that the board has is the one that you always have with you really have a dichotomy. Do you want to require the preparation of a draft environmental impact statement? Or given the change between what is there now and what is proposed to be there, do you believe that there's any significant adverse environmental, any adverse environmental impact that has not been addressed through the design of the project? And we really only identified moderate to large issues with respect to flooding in part 2 of the EAF. So that is so the next thing that we did was develop draft documents, just draft documents for the board to consider, which is an EAF part 3 that sets forth the justification for not requiring a draft environmental impact statement. And Ashley or Alicia could speak to those, maybe walk us through those documents.
Right. Okay. Let me just clarify. As we've stated many times, we are at the environmental review portion of this application. We're not anywhere near site plan approval. When we finish here, if we continue as has been recommended by our consultants, the applicant will go on to zoning board to request, I think, 5 variances, at least 5 variances, and they will go on to HCZM. Ultimately, this application will come back to the planning board, looking exactly the same as it does now, perhaps not. And we will do a site plan review at that point in time where there will be a public hearing and the public, all members of the public who wish to speak will be heard. But we're not there yet. This is not an approval of the project tonight in any way, shape, or form. It's just going to be moving along the process. So I just want to make that clear. We stated it many times, but just in case it's don't understand or are new to the process, this is the process, stated by laws and state laws and code. Okay, all right.
Yeah, and Kathy, if I could just add one more thing. If there's a change in the project after it goes to the ZBA, or if there's new information that you've received as a result of the project, which changes your look at the environmental impacts, you remain the seeker lead agency for that review. So if after you've taken this action, there's any of the 3 criteria that would lead you to re-examine it, you are free to do that as the seeker lead agency. And you'll see in the EAF part 3 that AKRF put together the table of area variances that they are requesting. Not that we have an opinion on those, that's wholly within the jurisdiction of the Zoning Board of Appeals, but it is relevant, for instance, that they're looking for a higher building, they're looking for a height variance in part because they want to have the garage underneath, which has the flood vents. So if there's some subsequent change in design that would change flood elevation or one of these other requirements, for instance, the second floor area where people can be offloaded also requires an area variance because of proximity in terms of the sideline, these are things that you look at again. But for now, with the project as it is, you would be making this determination.
Okay. Okay, turn the mics over to Ashley and Alicia, or Ashley and or Alicia. Okay. Thanks,
I'll take the lead. So I agree with everything that Teresa just summarized. So the EAF Part 3 does take a deeper dive into what were identified as the moderate to large impacts, which were the potential impacts to flooding. So what we provided was an EAF Part 3 that summarizes the description of the action. We identified all of the materials that were provided throughout the process that we thought were relevant to reaching the seeker determination. We provided an analysis of the magnitude of the potential impact in terms of the amount of square footage and the number of potential people that would be living within the flooding area. And then we also provided a summary of all of the mitigation measures that have been included as part of the project to mitigate any impacts to flooding. So these are things like the evacuation plan, the parking of the elevator at the second floor, the ability for boats to be able to come up to the offloading area. You know, as Teresa mentioned, tying some of the variances to flood mitigation measures. So that's really the basis for some of those variance requests. Basically, this EAF allows the board to reach the conclusion that because of all of these mitigation measures that have been included as part of the project, the board could reach a negative declaration. But ultimately, at the planning board as lead agency, that would be your determination.
Okay. Okay. So I'm hoping, and this came to us yesterday with the minor corrections and some typos again today. I hope that everyone had an opportunity to review this carefully, because this is important. We also received a resolution that would memorialize our decision, and another document which is basically the same as the Part 3, right? The negative declaration document.
Yeah, it is. It's
Very similar, yeah.
Right. It's like an attachment to that, is that it? Okay. So I think we've all said, you know, how we feel about this, and but let's get real here. Anybody have anything they want to start off with?
Just that I'm very uncomfortable with where we stand legally. I think it's foolish to promote residential development in a flood area. And that there's nothing negative about flooding.
The village code allows it, Richard. So
I know.
Feel about it. We have to follow the laws. I think we all feel a little uncomfortable right now, but we have to follow the laws. And as has been pointed out to us many times, there's people living on that piece of property right now that have no chances of staying there, or, you know, they had water in there up to their first floor during Ida. So, I don't know what to say. But yeah, I mean, is there anyone here who's not uncomfortable? But thank you.
I'm uncomfortable, but I don't think there's any other choice if we want to follow the law, which I think we do.
Yeah.
I have
minor thing.
I have one specific comment to the I guess Part 3 itself, which I think is just further clarification of exactly what we're saying, which is that I'm not comfortable with the way that Roman numerat 7 on page 5 is worded. So I'd like to change "not result in the creation of a hazard to human health" to not result in the creation of a hazard to human health from exposure to new or existing sources of contaminants, which is the balance of that item that we reviewed, number 16 from our Part 2.
Right, it's not flooding, it doesn't refer to flooding, it refers to contaminants, right? I remember that from last time. So finish the sentence, basically.
So we would just add due to exposure to harmful contaminants.
Yeah, whatever,
Or I'd like to, I mean, I don't know why we wouldn't use the exact language that we
yeah,
reviewed.
the exact language that's,
Standard.
that
which
was in
is-
part 2, right?
Yep, so it's from exposure to new or existing sources of contaminants.
New or existing.
And that's right off the head for that, from that section 16, impacts on human health that we reviewed and marked no.
Yep, that's perfect, Seamus. Thank you.
I also have a question on page 3, under assessment number 8, where it says parking areas to be fully enclosed to prevent vehicles from flooding off site. I think we have to mention that there will be flood vents there because that makes it sound like it's completely enclosed. It's nice that the vehicles won't, if they're still parked there, won't flood site and possibly block the river, as what happened in Ida with things floating downstream, but and hitting bridges that are still not functional.
Well, could we be sort of vague and just say, you know, measures taken to prevent vehicles from floating off site, or multiple measures, or rather than list them all?
Yeah, you know, I mean, however we need to word that so it doesn't sound like the water's not going to flow through. That's all.
Okay.
Other than that, and the fact that we went 1,000 years into it.
Ashley, how would you change 8 to reflect that?
The parking area would be enclosed to prevent vehicles from floating off-site, but would maintain flood vents.
Okay.
Well, but it's not just the flood vents, aren't there? There are 2 sets of spaces that are stacked. So I would assume cars in the lift aren't going to flow off site because they're elevated. So that's why I was leaving a little bit vague.
Depends on how deep the water is.
Well, let's do this. Let's just say parking area designed to prevent vehicles from floating off site. How's that? That'll be simpler.
Right.
Yeah, that seems direct to the issue.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry,
All right.
Ashley.
That's fine.
Okay, anybody else have anything they want to say before we call for, how do we do this, Teresa? Just vote on the resolution?
Yep, if you vote on the resolution, you'll be adopting the part 2 we did last time and this part 3. So
Okay.
With the 2 changes that we've mentioned, right? That's what we would vote on.
that's right. So we need a motion.
Okay, I'll call for a motion for the resolution with the part 3 of the EAF as amended.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Okay. Let's see, can I do this in alphabetical order without not being in alphabetical order? Cindy?
Yes.
Richard?
Yes.
Seamus?
Yes.
Ellen?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, you're off to the zoning board. And we'll see you when you get back, and we'll see how we stand, where we stand then. But,
Thank you very much, planning board members. We'll
Thank
see
you.
you in a few months.
okay, yeah, we'll see you in a few months.
Good night.
Okay. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the comprehensive plan review. I hope everybody had an opportunity to look at that document, and Brittany, is Neil around?
Yeah.
He's being very patient, but we're not as late as we were. And I guess we not need, let's see, who don't we need? Susan, John,
Teresa.
you're welcome to stay. Teresa. See you all in September. Have a nice month of August.
Happy summer.
Healthy, stay cool. Okay,
Bye-bye.
I've got to, I can't figure out, I have, well, I only have one screen right now, so I don't have access to the document. But I do have all my notes, and I did write them out. Okay, all right. So thank you for sending us the memo, Neil, with respect to some questions that you had for us and how you want us to, to answer. I looked at those, but I also took the opportunity to look through the whole document.
Great.
I don't know if anybody else did. But I have some overall comments, and then I have some chapter by chapter comments, and then I have my answers to your question, but we can discuss this. But I think maybe the best way to do this is just to sort of start with overall impression. I can start, but other people please chime in. Then we can go chapter by chapter, and then 4, 5, and 6 are the chapters that Neil asked us to look at and answer some questions. So we can do a little bit more detail on this. So, my first impression, besides what we said to you 2 weeks ago about a lot of this stuff being outdated, because I think, when did you start this? I mean, it was
2018.
Right. So that's a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. Things have changed. Things have changed
a lot. And so I'm not going to get into things that are outdated. I mean, I think that's a comment that you already have and whatnot. But I think since then, everybody has come to the realization that climate change is real. I mean, look what's happening all over the world. Look what's happening here in Mamaroneck. And I think the idea that Mamaroneck is a community that floods and is going to flood it really has to be said. I mean, there's nothing we can do to change that at this point in time. We have to prepare for it. And if you've heard any of the discussion we just had for that last, it's not only village code that needs to be addressed, but it's addressing climate change. And I think some of the information, I think this village has been, a little behind the times and looking at some things that we can do with regards to fossil fuels and carbon footprints and things like that. Now, you also made some reference to the Army Corps of Engineer project, the way it was in 2018. It will be updated to the way it is now, but it also should be described what it is and isn't going to do. Like everybody says, the Army Corps of Engineer project, it's not gonna solve flooding. It might mitigate it somewhat. There's some downsides to it, a lot of downsides to it, but I think that it has to be described in a way that people understand what it is and the impact it's going to have on our planning for going forward. The second overall point I'd like to make is that, like the 2012 update, this one is going to include a lengthy list of things to do, and more is going to be added once you get to the finish line. I was very dismayed to read, as you gave us an update on all the 2012 things to do, there was very little accomplished.
I noted that same thing.
Yeah, in fact, virtually nothing.
At least it's said in as many words, perhaps.
Yeah. And I think if you went back to the comp plan before that and the one before that, you will also say the same thing. I'm serious about this, and this isn't just an exercise because it's required by law. I would have a section in there, what are the critical success factors for successful implementation, or are we going to just accept that this is a paper exercise? At the first thing this needs is a champion at the highest level to make this happen. We no longer have a planning department, even though we still are calling it a planning department. We don't have a planning department, and all the references to the planning department studies and the planning department did this has to be the former planning department or something. I mean, yes, for the planning department, and yes, there's a room that says planning department on it. But given what some of the things that were done by the previous planners that were here and things that are done now, it's night and day. But it should be something that you will be able to put together sort of critical success factors. My next one is the vision statements. First of all, there's more than one vision statement. Usually people have a vision statement and it tends to be short and aspirational and hopeful. the vision statements here are more like action statements and not a grand vision.
Well, I find vision statements to be very vague.
Yeah.
And so I tried to avoid vision statements and do something more because, we would want a safe community with good quality of life, and
Yeah.
it ends up being a very generic. But keep going,
Yeah.
keep going, keep
Yeah,
going.
you can call it something else then. Okay, here's my question. How does a community advance affordable housing while stating they want to maintain the past and current neighborhood character?
Right.
Okay.
Right. So neighborhood character is the way. Let me open up that plan
Yeah, I don't
document.
know if anybody else is struck with that dichotomy and how I think they're mutually exclusive.
Well, I think there's two things. And this goes back to all of the analysis on the moratorium study was focused on the corridors, with the exception of Washingtonville, which was also looked at. And so that was the place where most of the development in terms of larger scale development has happened. And in the residential neighborhoods, I think the question is, is that going to be the place where there can be more affordable housing built? And it's really going to be on the corridors. So the character of the residential neighborhoods generally will continue to be can continue to be the same, unless you're talking about things like upzoning, which is something which is in the section, which I would agree it's an issue happening other places. It's not necessarily something that it can be relevant here if people want it to be, but I don't think that's going to happen in the neighborhoods in Mamaroneck. Significant changes in the types of houses that are built and rebuilt. They're
getting larger for single families.
Yeah, and that's the question is, if they're getting larger, the homes, and being torn down, then you're which is happening other places, then that's another issue. But so largely neighborhood character is referring to the residential neighborhoods, maintaining that. And also I wanted to be sure to word it carefully, because it's the qualities of Mamaroneck, that's the walkability and things which are part of the character, and not necessarily entirely architectural or scale. It's the walkable character. So I think when neighborhood character, and I believe I have to look back at the 2012, because some of these vision statements were the 2012 were launch pads, and neighborhood character is a term that's often used, and when it's, and yes, and it can be used often with the intention of maintaining a certain a certain style, so that there's a certain, whether it's a detached houses that a community consists of entirely, to protect that. But I think in this case, I would just say that I think neighborhood character is referring to the residential neighborhoods.
Right.
And yeah, so I think
I think that has to be said up front, sort of in the executive summary, totally upfront. Let's clarify this. When we're talking about supporting affordable housing, we're talking about the corridors and in not every neighborhood, so people aren't confused,
Sure.
But I would just be keep it simple, state things simply. In several chapters, you included the then capital budget. I think
well,
the capital budget isn't a real capital budget. It's just a list of requests from department heads. There's no prioritization or right.
And
so,
I think going back to your original statement about a champion, I just by having been involved in the village for so long, I know that the Board of Trustees often has a document called Board of Trustees priority lists, and the comp plan should be that list essentially. And that's not the case usually. It's other things which may be important, but the comp plan ultimately should play a large role in making the list.
Well, to tell you the truth, now that I've been on the planning board for almost 5 years, and we've been facing with things like what we face with today, and what we faced with in the past, like the Hampshire, having the comp plan be real and not just paper would have been very helpful to us.
Yeah.
Very, very helpful to the planning board. I mean, we're not a bunch of volunteers,
Right. Right, yeah.
Have something to be real instead of
Right.
just, a book on a shelf.
Well, I think it's a two-step program. It has to be real, but then so you have to do it. There are
You have
lots
to
of great
exactly.
suggestions.
You have to implement things.
I think one overarching point about that is, I think, comp plans tend to be, well, they tend to be overemphasizing comprehensive, the word comprehensive, and they can be more pointed and strategic. And some of the edits will involve taking some of the kind of preface matter and putting it in an appendix. So there's a lot of prefatory language, which could be put in the back. I think it's better to get straight to the point. But the second thing is the recommendations are organized by priority, short-term, midterm, and that's kind of a plug to, really, rather than just be, okay, this is a recommendation 1, this is recommendation 2, they're right away organized in terms of time stage of implementation, and that's a plug for really, really paying attention to that and setting up some timelines for these things to happen.
Assuming that there's somebody who is paying attention.
Right. Without applying
I
to
know I
permanent.
spoke to this last time, but I'll say again, I'm very uncomfortable having the upzoning and ADUs be on, in the comp plan as a to-do list. I don't think it should be in there at all unless it's in the appendix as like, some options communities have used for affordable housing. But by putting it in the body of the comp plan, it's blessing something that has not been blessed by the residents of Mamaroneck, and I just don't think it belongs there. I know I said more about it last time, but I still feel that.
That went to 3. That whole, okay. I think I would agree, like I said in my memo, that the content, the upzoning, the teardowns, the long discussion on ADUs isn't necessary to be 1, 2, 3 pointed out quick. I think, like I said, they're not. I mean, anything can be relevant should people want that, but that's not how teardowns isn't happening in a large scale in Mamaroneck. Upzoning, I don't think there's any appetite for anybody to start allowing duplexes and triplexes in residential neighborhoods. ADUs is part of an affordable housing strategy. It can be, but the way the West Coast has it down to a way that which it actually can serve as affordable housing. The way it's typically done here in the East Coast is just a way to add a unit to a house or a property, which it will end up being market rate. And so it doesn't really touch on affordability, as much as people think. And so that's why I say it's very complicated. I think, however, I think because this went through the recommendation and that passage on ADUs has been there for a while, in the previous drafts as well, and it went through the review process, and there was generally support behind it. But I think the reason for keeping a description of ADUs in there is to talk about, because I think it's often thought of as an easy solution, and I don't think it is an easy solution at all towards affordable housing. And
I just want to say,
isn't leaving it in the comp plan basically telling the village this is on your to-do list?
no, if it's a recommendation, it is. If it's anything there is just information. If it's a recommendation, and which then it's part of a recommending, it's a policy recommendation, but
that's one of my comments.
it's information, and there is some degree of education that has to happen on certain topics, because I think just going down to sustainability, the reason there's a whole page on defining sustainability is because even on the Committee for the Environment, there was differing versions of what sustainability means. So we wanted to nail down a definition of sustainability. So there's kind of education component and making sure people understand this is what we mean when we say sustainability, with respect to I think the teardowns and upzoning are trends, which I don't think are. If this is a town which is facing those issues, then I would agree that the text content should be there.
We've been doing teardowns lately. We've been doing more teardowns than I would have expected. It depends on what neighborhood you're in.
Yeah.
Right, it depends on what.
To follow up on what you just said, Neil,
Yeah.
I after I went through a couple of chapters, I could see that there was history, 2012, planning, education, and theory, and
Sure.
and it got jumbled in my mind in many places. It wasn't clear what was reality and what were you recommending, or what was just to educate us on some things. So I, if it's pure theory and education, it should say that. Here are some things that you could consider, or here's things going on in the planning world. And it shouldn't be very jargony, because no planners. It should be, anybody who's going to read this is not going to be a planner, except for maybe two people here on the panel. But
right.
It should be, keep it simple, fourth grade reading level for people. And I'm not saying that disparately, that's the average reading level of the, I used to do presentation, write things, you got to write it for the fourth grade,
But to have a lot of, I think the educational value is good and an appendix is great, but when the Board of Trustees votes to adopt this, to have a conversation about ADUs in some meaty way, like it's something that the community wants, they've adopted a policy. And I think it means something different when it's in the plan. The conversation about ADU should happen before the plan is finalized.
Yeah. But however, I'm reading this and I'm remembering there are places in Mamaroneck that have illegal ADUs right now that are completely unknown to the neighbors. The people have been living there for decades. And I'm thinking about some large properties on some streets in Old Rhinebeck where there are barns still, and there's been some conversions to apartments. I happen to know people who lived there in the past. That could be a conversation we could have, because there's already people there. We could be legalizing these types of units. They already exist. They can be identified. We could ask people to come forward. They'd have no penalty or anything. There'd be some period of amnesty where they could come forward and we could identify these and, see if they're affordable, or they could have some benefit in their tax rate or something, or taxes if they made them affordable or something. They exist in great numbers. I don't know, but they do exist. So that's something.
Yeah, and it's also a question as to whether we would want to legalize them. I think, we could, I think a strategy would be to go the other direction and not legalize them, but to, get into compliance with the law, because so many times in Mamaroneck, we're not in compliance.
You have fire safety reviews, have all sorts
building
of
codes. Yeah.
Building codes. Exactly. There's a discussion to be had. There's a discussion to be had. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying do it. There's a discussion to be had. So yeah.
Right.
I also want to point out that I think there's two school districts in the village of Mamaroneck. And
yes.
There were references to schools in the Mamaroneck School District that are not in the village of Mamaroneck. The Murray Avenue School is not in the village of Mamaroneck. It should not even be in there. And there's some reference to things going on in Mamaroneck High School with regards to sustainability and environmental issues, but they're also going on in the Rhinebeck High School. So they also should get mentioned. And you probably don't know this, there's two watersheds. There's the Drake Mamaroneck watershed, and then there's the flooding that happens in Rhinebeck coming down from.
But there were 3 watersheds.
Well, are you counting Sheldrake and Mamaroneck as 2?
1 each, yeah, and then Beaver Swamp.
Oh, well, where they converge, but yeah, the Beaver Swamp, they got terrible flooding on Ida, and it empties out into Guyon Creek at the top of the parkway, which still has damage from Ida flooding. And so there are other places that flood. People had water up to, or maybe even into their first floor during Ida over in that section of town. And there's no mention of that watershed and flooding or anything anywhere in this document.
Right.
And
yeah.
You mentioned the WAC 4 report, which is Mamaroneck Sheldrake. There's a WAC 3 on Beaver Swamp Brook.
Now, on the topic of, so, I attended the Army Corps' meeting in May, I think it was May, and the statement kept coming up that the Army Corps of Engineers project is the foundation upon which other flood mitigation activities happen. And I know there's one that's actively being considered for the Columbus, the Columbus part, the parking lot, and the what is it? I think there's a word for it. Converting the culvert into an open channel that's been proposed to the BOT by that sort of thing. Now I figured a comp plan would be a place to at least start to identify what those other things are, and I guess that's a conversation I'm going to have with the flood mitigation folks, but that's just something.
Or the trustees.
But when you talk about flooding, though, you got to look on it as a regional approach.
Right.
Because we're the recipient of the floods, we're not the source.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
And there is absolutely no cooperation from the communities upstream.
Right. You're right.
Yeah.
And we heard that too in the report.
One thought that I had, I went to that meeting as well, is if you remember, the Army Corps was kind of laying out, I think there are 8 or 10 or 11 or whatever, like the discrete little projects that made up the whole thing. I believe that they studied more than those 11. So I would have thought that a launching off point for, our subsequent, as a village, our subsequent, potential follow-ups to that project would be to piggyback off of the work that the Army Corps did to determine which projects they were going to address. And so I think that is something that should be available to you if you were to request it either from that team that was up on the stage or at some point.
Okay, thanks.
The other thing I noticed as a global thing was there was not a lot of discussion of the LWRP, and it was often referred to as a draft. Yeah, there's a draft. It's an update. We have an LWRP. So we're operating under those principles and have since 1985. So I think, and the update.
It's been formally adopted? Is it formally adopted now, the update?
No.
Okay.
But the old one is still in place.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Right,
the old one has a very good vintage, October 1984. Same as one of your fellow
We were
members.
one of the first ones in the state, right? Weren't we one of the first ones? We were the first LWRP in New York State.
Wow.
Yes, we were a forward community back then.
What the hell happened?
I don't know.
It's
We're
still
trying.
1984.
This planning board is trying. All right, any other global aspect type things that sort of apply to more than one section besides, Richard, you're about to say something.
Well, I was just, the more I reread it, the more upset I got over how inadequate the zoning regulations are in this town. You don't want ADUs, you don't want big buildings, but here tonight we're allowing a building to go up one floor to avoid flooding. So one problem.
We are not doing that.
Well, the ground floor is open. I'm not a happy camper when it comes to the existing zoning. I think I had mentioned probably last time, back when John Verney was the chair, we were dealing with some zoning issue on the Post Road, and what I had recommended was 3-story buildings with the lower floor as a store and the upper 2 stories as affordable housing, because 3 stories, you don't need steel, you don't need an elevator, and it could be affordable, and it wouldn't change the character of the neighborhood. Now, I worry when you talk about neighborhood character, it's kind of a code word. Some people might interpret it as, only large homes and what have you.
But the corridor, I mean, there is some recommendation, but having commercial on the first floor and then having apartments above it, commercial's changed.
Well, you know what I was going to say from that was a couple of years ago, and now I'm thinking maybe we don't, given the change in retailing where everybody gets delivered, we could do 3-story apartments.
Right.
And
Right.
I
But you
don't
do
see how
need
that
you do
changes
need to
neighborhood
have
character.
access for ADA. You can't build a building without an elevator. You have to have ADA access.
Well, yeah, on the first floor.
How do people get upstairs? You're in a wheelchair.
The wheelchair apartments are on the first floor. I lived in such an apartment in Manhattan.
Okay, right, as long as that, meets ADA, right.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I think, I don't know, I read this and I just felt like, I applaud you, Neil, for taking the chapters and doing them by topic and like including sustainability, environment and things like that. But I just felt like I was reading something that could have been written 10 years ago in some places, But, I tried to get over that. I don't have anything to compare this to. And as I said, I'm not a planner per se. I have been involved in certain meetings and, comp plans for a long time. But when I was elected to the Board of Trustees in 2000, we talked about rewriting the zoning code. That was 22 years ago and it hasn't been done. And looking at things as a whole and not fix this piece, but now this piece is wrong because the connection between the two has been severed, as we've found many times as we go forward. But it just hasn't been done. It hasn't been done. There hasn't been the will or the way, or I don't know why. I tried, but I couldn't succeed by myself. Okay. Okay, so any other sort of overall global, or how do you want to do this? We can go chapter by chapter.
I think that's going to take a really long
To
time.
say until
Yeah.
chapter 4.
There's a lot of chapters. Chapter 5 and 6 are really the things that, I have other, the traffic commission, I'm talking to all the commissions, so.
We can focus on those and give you other comments in writing.
It's really, it's really chapters 5 and 6, which there's things that are certainly within the scope or purview of planning board that you're interested in, you can inform about. And so really chapters 5 and 6, there's my memo, and I don't need to go down item by item. It's really if any of those questions or things resonated or triggered or brought a lot of thought or thinking, whether you support it or you think it should be changed. I think that's really more important than going through each one right away. So
that's fine.
And
I don't have any problem with that. Okay.
And Neil, do you, you really want a list of all the subdivision applications since October of 2018?
Well,
you'll need an appendix.
So that again, there was a planning department, there is a planning department. That's something, but Greg Cutler had been compiling, so it's not important. It's just if there's something, it's not important. I guess the main question is it still continuing to be, well, the BOT certainly is the first time really engaging with the planning board because, thanks to Kathy for, contacting me right away. But this is the first time engaging with the planning board, and it was the BOT that was very concerned about the subdivisions. And so I want to hear whether it continues to be a concern. There needs to be better subdivision regulations. That's one of the kind of questions in my
well, I'm trying to figure out you've had single family homes, purchased and, on a larger lot, and the home in the middle is divided and, then there's two homes.
Taylor's Lane, we had one of those.
I think that one is listed in there.
Yeah.
Well, it shows Hampshire's under consideration.
Yeah.
The question.
Yes, to update you on Hampshire, you probably know. We went through the secret process and we denied the project, and they're suing us. That's
right. Right. And
we haven't done any large subdivisions.
Yeah. There's not a lot of large land left within the village. So most of the subdivision applications that we've seen in the last year and a half have been minor lot line adjustments or maybe a one lot subdivision. It's nothing big.
We had Grove, we had Henry, they're Osborne.
Right. Well, Grove was one house and now it's 3. I don't know if, and they're not affordable or anything like that. They're in residential neighborhoods, but
I think there was one on Monroe, a small subdivision.
Don't forget 888 Oriente, which was one big house, and now it was 2 lots, and now it's one big house and a little lot.
Grand Street.
We
I
did
think
3 subdivision applications on that property.
Grand Street, I think, went
They're
from
all
1 dwelling to 3. It
Yeah.
doesn't sound like a lot, but it is here.
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
question that I had on this table is, what is the point? Is it supposed to be a comprehensive list of everything? Is it supposed to be a case study? And I think that you should make it clear what it is. If you just like there are some different types and you do them as a couple different case studies, that would make sense. And you want it to be clear. If you just want to put all of them, I would probably do it in a more summarized form, like this year had X of this,
Yeah.
3 to 1, just because it's so specific with the address and it's not clear what the big picture is immediately.
Well, there's a lot of ink to if I'm looking here at, there's several pages, again, there's a lot of prefatory language that may not be necessary because it gets really too much into detail. But there's a lot of ink devoted to subdivision regulations and what they are and design standards. And there's a table of policy and regulatory actions on page 84, which essentially are summarized wherever there's I think it's page 86, there's the action plan for residential neighborhoods. And there's a whole series of zoning and subdivisions. I think there was a lot of concern in the BOT at that time, which is the reason why we did a walkabout with several BOT members, in 2019 through the neighborhoods. There just seemed to be a large amount of concern back then. And I guess I'm trying to get the sense of, and there's a lot of ink in this comp plan about recommendations for improving zoning so that the outcomes of new houses as a result of subdivisions and things, are fit in with Mamaroneck in terms of garages being facing the sides instead of facing the front and things like that. And so there's a lot of recommendations in that section, in the recommendation section of chapter 5, that go into these zoning details on houses and the subdivision details. And I'm wondering, are these things which to you were things that you've been concerned about for a while and make sense, or things that this is kind of like, or is this kind of, new information that there's you don't see the same sense of urgency that the BOT seemed to show at the time?
I think with regards to, something Richard said, as far as updating the zoning, that's critical. Absolutely. In code, and making sure that it's compatible with other sections of the code and it's compatible with its own sections within is 100%, 100%. One of the most important things that has to happen, because there's a lot of outdated things now. Ashley had been starting a list. This is now quite a while ago. We can certainly, I hope, provide you with what we had so far. There's things that we've noticed since then, the zoning code, and then back after Sandy, there were a lot of flood type codes added in a different section of the code, and they weren't always compatible to one another and whatnot. There's a lot of work that has to be done by someone who knows what they're doing there.
Got it. So there is a need for a kind of a global or comprehensive look at the zoning code, which is something the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, not just the zoning code, but all sections that relate.
Sections.
Right.
They don't all.
Got it.
Properly right now.
They're not all in the zoning chapter, right?
Got it. I see. Yeah.
And the tree,
And like one of the big
new
issues.
tree law that just got passed, and it's not, there's sections in the tree law that now have to refer to sections in the zoning code and vice versa.
Right.
We put together comments on that months ago, and the board hasn't addressed that yet. But as far as, some of the questions that, you asked, your first one was on upzoning, tear downs, and ADUs. I mean, I think we're seeing tear downs in some of the neighborhoods. I mean, where the R10 zoning is more prevalent, we're seeing tear downs, and we're seeing bigger houses going up. And one of the things that's coming with bigger houses are spa-like pools and Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that. What we're seeing now is courtyards in the front, so nobody has to ever back out of their driveway again. Large sections, large paving. I mean, now we have impervious surface rules and stuff like that, and they have to mitigate and all of that.
Right.
Coverage of the lot can't be more, but it's ostentatious and it's large, and there are no sidewalks to the street, you know, and the sidewalks to the driveways now basically don't exist because the driveways are going right up to the front door. So,
Right.
you know, you have this whole thing about, being inviting and walkability and whatnot. That's not happening anymore. It's being, removed. You know, people are closing in. The pandemic, people are hunkering in and putting these big, you know, pools and all sorts of amenities in their yards.
So that's really good. That's very interesting to know, because obviously it's not just the subdivisions of properties, but tear downs that are resulting in you know, just little details of Marinette's residential streets that aren't there anymore.
We don't have, you know, when I worked in New York City for a while, so as the building got higher, there was, you know, step backs and whatnot with the building. We don't have that. So these big boxes are getting put up there. You know, it's up to the AR to, you know, to architecturally look at things and see, you know, in conformity with the rest of the neighborhood. But when you're putting up this house that's as large as it could possibly be next to a house built in the 1950s, there's no conformity with how things look in the neighborhood, and there never will be.
Right. And so this was precisely the assignment I had in Princeton, New Jersey, where you could see you could see the results of having an extremely outdated zoning code from 1970, and the results of, and then the market in Princeton obviously got hot, a lot of jobs. You could see home by home being torn down, and the result was just very jarring in the neighborhood. And so all that, there's a case study of Princeton given, not only because it really did a nice way, it packaged, it came up with number one, illustrated zoning code, which illustrations are probably a helpful thing in most zoning codes, just, you know, illustrating the principles that are in the code, of course. And they came up with, just codified a lot of the concepts, you know, that whether it's garage frontages, garage size, volume, and I think that's the type of thing that could be, you know, could make sense for Marinette, and so that's kind of what chapter 5 gets. Chapter 5 gets to that. Gets to those types of things.
You know,
the recommendations really kind of aim towards that, towards starting to, when there's change in the neighborhoods through tear down subdivisions, that the outcomes of those have some parameters that, you know, so that, you know, that the result is something that fits with, you know, the walkability, the walkable appearance and whatnot of Marinette's neighborhoods. You know, sidewalk in front, garage facing the side, you know, a path leading to the sidewalk, and so on and so forth. But, you know,
I mean, I looked at the recommendations. I mean, all of them. You know, Mike, I already gave you my comment about the front walks, sort of disappearing in neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks, and we have a lot of neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks. Recommendation of 5.3, and I don't have this in front of me. I apologize. I don't have two screens where I'm at right now. My comment on that was we should be actively encouraging less lawn and more gardens, and especially gardens for pollinators.
Right.
That should be in there. That's today's, you know, topic.
Absolutely.
For recommendation 5.6, there is a new tree law. So we're protecting trees now, and we are making people, if they take one down, plant replacement trees.
Right.
I already talked about some ADUs that exist already. And then you had asked about recommendation 5.8. That's what I talked about. 5.9, the character-based and the form-based zoning. I don't have a problem with the concept. I have a problem with it being very jargony, you know. And when I hear character-based, I don't know. It kind of it jars me a little bit. I don't like it. But
is it better than Euclidean? Is that is that a better one? Is that a better? Well, that's right. Like I said in the memo that I think form-based code is it's often rushed to, but I don't think it's an answer. And for those who don't, I believe I can go into. I'm not going to go into my whole lecture on the gradient between land use based Euclidean zoning all the way to form-based code. But I think essentially when the term character is used, character-based zoning, it's really, instead of drawing districts based on land use, okay, this is the commercial district, it's
Right.
based on what the area is. And I mean, although C2 is called the C2, the boundaries make sense because it's downtown. And so C2 is a character-based district for all intents and purposes because it's the downtown district.
But in New York City, you just have different use groups. So you could do residential in a C zone. And the standards are all set out. So what we need is a little bit more sophistication in the local zoning. You don't have the flexibility that I used to play with every day.
Well, I think well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I think the point I was trying to make in the whole idea of identifying these, maybe the character district is just a weird phrase. It is a weird phrase. Maybe there's a better way to say that. But really, that's what
the establishment of use groups would do. It would allow you to do the character, whatever the official zoning is, and it would all fit together.
Oh, I don't know how to. I mean, for a small village, I mean, it's simply put. You can say, you know, what I'm trying to get at is that, you know, Halsted Avenue, you know, has a pretty different character, different feel than, you know, Mamaroneck Avenue, or this, you know, Post Road East. There's a very different feeling, and yet they're zoned the same. And so what I'm getting at is that, so that doesn't make sense, you know, when you have something that has buildings that are taller than 2 stories already. Halsted Avenue is you're already zoning. A lot of the buildings are non-conforming, and so I think when you just label, when the zoning is essentially C1 boilerplate through Halsted Avenue C1, you're missing out the opportunity. You're missing out on what's already there, and then the potential to create things that are similar to what's already there. And you know, so I mean, that's kind of basing.
You need more variables to be able to fine tune the land use within the zones, and we don't have that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have mixes of uses in a lot of these zoning codes.
But I mean, I conceptually, I see what you're saying, and I agree with it. It's just it doesn't come across that way on the page.
Okay.
Oh, I'm reading this, and I'm reading form-based, character-based. I understand character. There's a synonym for that. I mean, if that's what it's called in the field, that's what it's called in the field. But it has to be defined in such a way that people understand, what it means. And I think, it's used throughout. Maybe even having a section on definitions.
Oh no. Yeah, I think
zoning code, but I think you're right. I mean, Boston Post Road East is different from Boston Post Road West, which is different from Halsted Avenue. It's different from Mamaroneck Avenue, and if they're all zoned fairly similarly, it doesn't get at what it could become more. It just is there room for some development on Boston Post Road East? We've had there was a former funeral home that's now a multifamily dwelling on that site. There was a gas station, and now there's a bank. There's a lot of banks. The corner where there was a gas station with South Barry is now a urgent care center. We had an application tonight for an empty bank that wants to turn into a physical therapy and a rehab center. We're all in keeping with what's in the plan, although I do notice that you are recommending private recreation in almost every one of these districts, and I'm not sure what that even means.
That was a Greg Cutler edition. I think there must be a reason, I think he meant private recreation, meaning things like,
personal training space,
like, I don't know, axe throwing or something, I mean, that's not a joke. That's actually true. That's
I know what axe throwing is.
Yeah, right. That's a thing. I've never done it, but that's a thing.
I've never done it.
That's a thing.
I think it was more of a thing than it is right now, but we're doing We have spaces that are converting to personal training spaces.
Right. I think, yeah.
Atlantic Avenue, there's one on the Post Road. I see a couple in Harrison when I go up 127, so this is what's happening now. I mean, the Avenue is not just restaurants. The Avenue, is still has some retail, but a lot of the CVS is now a church on the Avenue.
Right.
The building on the corner with the Post Road has a physical, has a gym in it. And there's all different things happening, to fill the space. And a lot of it is healthcare related because that's a growing business, and any kind of personal services.
Right.
That's what we're exchanging. That's what our economy is. I mean, we're not purchasing things from people anymmer. We're purchasing things online. It's a shame.
I mean, like you said about the retail on the ground floor, and over retailing, there's a lot of laws that have mandated first floor retail, and they've had to slowly kind of scale that back because they can't fill the
calling
spaces.
it commercial here, but we approved a project on Phillips Park Road next to O'Connell Park, which I didn't know how to name until I read it, which they wanted retail on the first floor, and we suggested they just call it commercial, and I understand having a problem with that. They want to convert it to an apartment. I think they went before the zoning board to convert it to an apartment. I don't know if it was approved or not.
Yeah.
There's not a demand for that kind of space. So, we have to be realistic and look towards the future. Will it bounce back? Will people start to realize there's not a lot of competition and we've got inflation because we've got large conglomerates setting prices, and Unilever own and Procter & Gamble own most of the world. And maybe if they had some local stores, they could have some better prices. I don't know. I don't think if anybody's going to realize that. It's going to make much of a difference. But I mean, people who shop the Avenue. I mean, we always go into Roberts and places like that. Hopefully he'll be there forever. But there's some people hanging on by a thread. But anyway, okay. So that, does anybody have any other questions? I mean, any other comments to answer Neil's questions on chapter 5, residential neighborhood? What time is it getting? It's 9 o'clock, a little after 9. We're much earlier than we were last time, but then we had questions on chapter 6. But does anybody have anything else to say on form-based versus character-based? I mean,
well, personally, I think I want to remove the reference to form-based,
and just
because if already character-based is I think just leaping to that, any regular resident reading it, maybe I think even people who are in the field aren't able to define what form-based zoning is, because it can be a different sort of thing. So I think the character base is a fundamental distinction. Maybe it could be named differently, but it's just it's one step that's different from the typical way things are zoned. That's probably enough. I don't think form-based code needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's similarities in feel, sort of when you talk about character, I'd have to get out my thesaurus and
right, we can look that up.
I might have one on my phone, but no, I'm not going to.
Yeah, you still. Oh, of course. I mean, but I'm talking about how you draw the boundaries as the first step, and then everything else you would have, use standards, building form standards, all that thing, same thing, and then of course uses. And then I think with I guess in terms, we've been sort of talking about both chapter 5 and 6, but there's any other anything anybody would like to
talking about it. Chapter 6, let me just see what my written notes say. Well, obviously we all know the real estate market is different.
Exactly. Right,
and it's changing even now, because
I was going to say it's going to change by the time this goes to print. So I think this is the most I appreciate that this is the most kind of critical feedback I've gotten, which is a good thing, because thank you. Because I mean, I agree with a lot of, my goal. I think planners don't, we're changing the way we do comprehensive plans, but comprehensive plans tend to be, like I said, overwhelmingly too comprehensive. You give data and tables, and charts. And so for that reason, I just put in a section called data snapshots, which we will be
Yeah.
updating, because I just want to pull out things that are really important.
Yeah.
And again, I think
You
your
have,
point
you have
about,
data kind of scattered throughout. I mean, some of the, the traffic data, it's based on
that
like
section, that section is,
15,
that's all,
2015. I mean,
yeah.
we've had an incredible increase in the number of people driving in Mamaroneck since then. I mean, there's been a lot of you can't drive down the Post Road on a weekend anymore. Unless you go up to Rye or go someplace like that. And it's forcing people to go away from the local stores because you can't get anywhere anymore. I mean, it really is. But anyway, on chapter 6, you have a whole section on reconnecting with the river.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be great? And I've had this idea for a really long time. If the Sheldrake River and the whole idea of a river walk, and I think it's in some section about the flats coming through along the river. I think when the Mason was built, there was some talk about a river walk and some talk about some public property going through there, but it connect right with Mamaroneck Avenue and go right into Columbus Park. So besides connecting with the Mamaroneck River behind all the buildings, we have the Drake River coming right out to Mamaroneck Avenue, and we have served environmental justice community there.
Right.
There's a lot of new things on the Gateway Corridor. There's that whole new development where the A&P used to be, which is now a CVS and a smaller grocery. There's an error in fact about a grocery store going in where there was a CVS. It's the other way around. There's a CVS where there was a grocery store, but there's other things there now too. So you need to get updated on that.
Yeah.
And this is in more than one chapter. The East Boston Post Road does not ever go near Harrison. It connects with the city of Rye, not with Harrison. It's in chapter 6 and it's again in chapter 8.
Harrison, okay.
And as far as your questions,
I see, yeah.
I mean, we talked about the moratorium study being sort of something in the past and not so prominent now.
Right.
The redevelopment, figure 86, yeah, that wasn't clear to me at all. And revitalization strategies, I think it would take a lot of work for this village to switch to character zoning and redo the zoning code in a way that is more modern and makes sense for today. But I would certainly think that we need to do it. Opinion, but I've been saying this for over 20 years now. And since nobody's listening to me, maybe I should shut up. All right, anybody else have anything else? Neil, do you have any other questions for us? Anybody have anything they wanted to say to Neil? And I mean, I don't know if you all wrote some comments down, we can shoot them to Ashley. When would you like written comments by, Neil?
Yeah, if, like you said, if you have comments you wrote down, I think, Kathy, you have, and I think, I guess I should provide
Ashley agreed to sort of compile them for us if we need to be compiled.
Yeah, and actually we should just have a quick chat too also, consultant also.
Yes, you
We
should.
definitely do that as well. I think that would be helpful. So
Ashley hasn't been here forever, but she has a lot of knowledge so far. I mean,
no doubt.
She looks at things with a real critical eye.
No doubt. So yeah.
Are we each submitting written comments or?
If you want.
You'd like to, you could submit them to Ashley. Ashley could just compile them as planning board.
Submit them to Ashley? Okay.
Yeah, send them to Ashley, and then, Ashley and I will have a conversation. I think, within the next, 10 days, maybe, if that's, so that would be like.
Ashley, you can have mine tomorrow.
By like, I guess August, maybe by the end of, by August 5th, I guess, that's next Friday. That's a little bit more, that's a little less than 10 days, but, just to give some parameters, so it's not a open-ended thing, I guess.
Obviously, people have given a lot of thought. What we're doing right now is being taped. You can watch it again and again and again.
Right. And also, I will be updating the BOT periodically during this, and so, I'll be able to share with them. I spoke with you all, so.
Yes, please do. Tell them how wonderful the planning board is, and the planning department. Yeah.
Well, like I said, I didn't get the same degree of kind of thinking of comment that I got detailed comments from a lot of people, in paper, page number, this page. I guess I have to look back at what the comments I got were in the past and then
Yeah.
compare them to your comments. And maybe I'll have it, maybe your comments were just the same level. I don't know, but I appreciate your time in
Yeah.
digging through it, looking at beyond chapters 5 and 6. I appreciate that too for those of you who are able to do that. But yeah, if you have written comments, please do send them to Ashley and she'll convey them all to me. So.
Okay, great. Okay. Anybody have anything else they want to say or ask of Neil? I think everybody had something to say, which thank you very much. I mean, that's really good. Everybody has opinions. I always love people with opinions. And they don't even have to agree with mine. Can we adjourn this meeting? Is there anything else I have to do? I don't think so. Okay, I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I need a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good night, everyone. Have a good August and see you all in September.
Okay.
Thank you,
Enjoy.
Whitney.
Bye.
Thank you.